to the book that he put out and gave to the to all the missions at the United Nations, and that was Disarming the Nuclear Argument, which is was an update really of the book that I had gotten, but I went through that and underlined everything. So it's Disarming the Nuclear Argument, the Truth About Nuclear Weapons, which analyzes the cost, the accident risk, the legality of nuclear weapons, basically the absurdity of the whole concept of perpetuating nuclear weapons as deterrents. So it's a great book, and it's a great honor to have Timmon with us tonight to talk a little bit about the book. He's got a few slides he wants to show, and after we'll have a question-answer period. If there's a burning question that you hear a lot that you would like a little help with when you need to give an answer, this is the man to help you with that. So without further ado, great honor, Timmon. It's become a very close friend. God bless. Thank you.
In the 1980s, I spent almost 7 years camped outside a nuclear missile base in England called Molesworth. Anybody here heard of Molesworth or Greenham Common, perhaps? Yeah. Greenham Common, okay. So actually, I was a student at the time, and I heard through the grapevine. This was before Facebook and mobile phones even, and I heard about this peace camp at Greenham Common, and so I hitchhiked for 3 days to go to see them. But the details didn't quite reach where I was studying up in Aberdeen, and so I didn't know it was only for women. So, so I got there and they sent me away, and they sent me to this other camp called Molesworth, which was also where they were building a nuclear missile base as part of the huge build-up in the 1980s, which I'm sure most of you here were aware of and part of at that time. And I got totally involved in the campaigns there. I was at the camp. I was very involved in all these campaigns. We were growing wheat on the base to send to Eritrea in Africa. We built a peace chapel. Keep going. An all faiths peace chapel out of the rubble from the Second World War runways that were on the base. And we had all kinds of projects. We had our own school of peace studies. At one point, we had over 1,000 people living on this missile base. And I was there when they took the cruise missiles in, and I was also there when they took them out as a result of the treaty that was signed in '87, I think it was, when they got rid of all those weapons at that time. And probably like most people and many of you, I thought, well, phew, we've done that, we can go home now, do other things. And I started doing all these other sort of peace activities, but I sort of dropped the nuclear issue so that's 87, 97, for like 20 years. I was working on other things. I was working in other countries and working on, this protection of civilians and so on, and also local sort of conflict resolution projects and mediation. And I was not concerned about the nuclear issue until I got a job with the Quakers in London about 3 years ago, and they said, part of my job was to work on nuclear disarmament. And I said, okay, I'll do that. I thought I knew all about it because I did it back in the 1980s. And I started looking into it, and I couldn't believe that the same things were still going on, and the same arguments were still being made about why we have to have these. Long after the end of the Cold War, Soviet Union doesn't even exist anymore. All the reasons we heard in the 1980s, they twisted them around to make it sound like we're still in the same situation. And I just got so confused about it and thought, this is crazy. And so my job was to help peace campaigners in the UK to make the case as to why we shouldn't go ahead with the Trident. So Trident was they just made the decision last year, about this time last year, to develop a whole new generation of Trident submarines, missiles and warheads for the UK that will last them for another 60 years or more, and at a cost of £200 billion, which is for a country like the UK, that's more than they spend on anything. And it's the largest amount of money they've ever spent on any project. And they just, and they voted. They voted to go ahead with that, which was pretty disappointing. But I was working with people to try to help get this message out there and get the peace movement going again. Because as here, I suspect, everybody went home at the end of the Cold War, and it's hard to get people back on track. So what I did was, first thing I did was put it on the back of a postcard, all the arguments against nuclear weapons. So that's, a couple paragraphs there. There's also shorthand, ban nuclear weapons. There were also lots of little leaflets like, nuclear weapons mythbuster, and these are some of the ICANN things. And I did briefing papers. This was, I started trying to, people would say like, well, what about Russia? What about North Korea? What about, they've kept the peace all this time. Well, we can't get rid of them. And so I was trying to help people have counter arguments to these sort of reasons why we keep hearing people say we have to have these things. And so I wrote a frequently asked question, which is, there's some copies in the back if you want. This is again adapted. Well, I tried to adapt everything for the US, but I've been told it's not really that American. It's still very British. Sorry about that. I can't help it. But I'm trying to make it useful over here. But it just kept getting longer and longer, and I do have a PhD, but I'm not an academic. I don't read books that much. I don't have time. There's too much to do. So I wasn't really planning to write a book, but it just got longer and longer. So it's actually, it looks long, but it's very short chapters, and I just tried to put in one place all the arguments that you need. This isn't about, we did give these to all the embassies at the UN, but it's not trying to convince people who don't already agree with us. It's about helping us, helping the peace movement, helping people who already feel that there's something wrong with this, to have the arguments and the facts and the figures that, we can feel more empowered to go out and have these conversations. Because I'm personally convinced the only way to get rid of nuclear weapons or to change anything in the world is by having conversations with people. We've got to get out there and talk to them. Talk to workers, talk to family, talk to neighbors, talk to, people that just, and most importantly, people that and people that love and care about you, because they're the people we can actually influence. It's much harder talking to people on the street, and way harder talking to MPs or people in Congress or whatever who have all the arguments, and they don't listen. But I did lots of fun. I didn't actually do this. This was a friend of mine. But these are all the arguments, all in a handy little chart. Nuclear weapons are immoral, expensive, and very dangerous. Trident must be scrapped. That's the core argument. And then they say, well, what about, we need it to keep our seat at the top table at the United Nations, or, we're committed to our alliance with NATO, or, we're a responsible nuclear power. We don't want to let it get in the hands of these irresponsible nuclear powers. So we got all the arguments. There's not that many. You've heard them all before, but trying to lay out the arguments and the counter arguments to help people think those through. I also was with Anthony and some of you. I can't remember. I think you were at some of those. We had these interfaith vigils outside the United Nations, and just getting quotes from Pope Francis. Nuclear deterrence cannot be the basis of an ethic of fraternity and peaceful coexistence. This is all church statements, but we also had some interfaith ones. We had all the different faiths actually, and just how do we get this message across? And I started then after doing the book. There's also a website, so you don't have to buy the book. I've got the book here if anybody wants to buy a hard copy. Show them your tatty, rain-soaked, that was. But it's also available on Kindle for much cheaper, and you can download. I've got a good website, and I'm trying to put as much information on there as possible. I'm going to give you just a little sample of the kinds of information that you might find helpful, but it's probably most useful to sort of move to questions and answers and have a discussion. But I thought the first thing we could do is to show a short 3-minute video of the people some of them, the most unlikely people who say we've got to get rid of these things, because we all, sometimes when there's about 25 or whatever in the room, we can think that we're up against this huge mass of people who just don't care or who think we have to have these things. And it's quite empowering to me to realize that we are on the right side of history and we are on the right side of people. Unfortunately, the politicians and the generals don't come out against nuclear weapons until they retire or until they've moved on to some other job. But they all eventually come out and say, we got to get rid of these things. They all say that, really. So shall we just show this short? It's a 3-minute video. It's called "Who Wants to Abolish Nuclear Weapons?" If I can get it up the right. Yeah. Okay. Here we are. So. Yeah. So we're going to put the mic.
Thank you, Joanne.
We're going to put the mic on here, and we're going to start the video.
This is the moment when we have to move forward and all of us come together to reduce the number of nuclear weapons and then eliminate them from the face of the earth.
We must either love each other or we must die.
I demand zero.
Zero.
I demand zero. Zero.
Do away with them entirely.
The optimum number is none.
None.
We'd be better off without them.
I say zero.
No nuclear weapons.
Zero.
Zero nuclear weapons.
None.
The weapons of war must be abolished before they abolish us.
Our task, of course, is not an easy one, but nor was ending apartheid in South Africa.
I think that we escaped the Cold War without a nuclear holocaust by some combination of skill, luck, and divine intervention. It wasn't just the fate of our enemy that was at stake, but the planet as a whole. And so, yes, for me, the elimination of nuclear weapons is not just a moral imperative. It is, in effect, the ultimate measure of our worth as a species, as human beings.
We come to single, simple conclusion: ban the nuclear weapons.
And as a nuclear power, as the only nuclear power to have used a nuclear weapon, the United States has a moral responsibility to act. So today, I state clearly and with conviction America's commitment to seek the peace and security of a world without nuclear weapons.
We must be willing to recommit to the vision of a world without nuclear weapons.
And then you see pictures of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and you begin to see the horror and the inhumanity of them.
Que empeñarse por un mundo sin armas nucleares, en la letra y en el espíritu, hacia una total prohibición de estos instrumentos.
Moving us ever closer to the goal of the total elimination of nuclear weapons.
The world cannot afford to wait. I therefore appeal to all states to work together and seize this unique opportunity to ensure that nuclear weapons are prohibited and eliminated, once and for all.
Okay. So, that's some of the people we got on our side. So we're not doing too badly, really. You have to put that back down again.
That's Vicky's video.
So, you all know about the treaty, right? That was adopted on the 7th of July and is not, you don't know about it. Okay, so just very briefly, Anthony mentioned it, but On the 7th of July, after weeks of negotiation and months of pre-meetings that led up to this, and years and actually decades of campaigning by all kinds of groups, I'm sure many of you, and countries that have been pushing for this, actually since the very founding of the United Nations. You saw there the International Red Cross. That's the largest movement in the world of non-religious movement in the world, and they have the president of the Red Cross told us at the UN that they received a telegram in August 1945 from Hiroshima saying, we can't cope, there are no hospitals functioning, there are not enough doctors, there are too many people suffering. And ever since that day, they have been campaigning to make nuclear weapons illegal under international law. And this has been going on. There were victims from Hiroshima who've been part of that, including the woman that you saw on the video, Setsuko, who many of us have met, who's been to the UN many times. These people have been going at it all this time, including Dorothy Day and all these other people, and we finally got a treaty. Now, the treaty does not get rid of the weapons, but what it does is state unequivocally and absolutely that nuclear weapons are unacceptable and illegal, and we must move towards their total elimination. And 122 countries adopted that treaty. It was 122 to 1, and the one country that voted against it is the Netherlands, and you've got to keep track of the Netherlands because their government could well fall because of that vote, because the Netherlands has a very, very strong anti-nuclear weapons movement, as do many of these other countries that have not voted for this treaty. We just heard yesterday, that the Empress of Japan. Now, Japan, as you know, is the country that, the only country that's had nuclear weapons exploded on their, on their populations, and but they're also under, all these countries are under enormous pressure from the U.S. and other nuclear countries to hold on to the nuclear paradigm, if you like. And Japan voted. I mean, they were under pressure from the U.S., but they were also under enormous pressure from their own people to take part in these negotiations. So they squared the circle by turning up to the negotiations and then making a speech saying that they're not going to continue. But there's enormous pressure. There's been, of all the countries in the world that have been following this, Japan's probably had the most publicity. The media, we saw everywhere we went, the Japanese media is following everybody around. And just yesterday, the Empress of Japan, who has more status than the president or the prime minister or whatever, made a very, very powerful speech about the need to eliminate all nuclear weapons, and congratulating ICANN for the Nobel Peace Prize and supporting the treaty. So there's a lot going on in Japan. There's a lot going on in Australia, where again the pressure is on from the U.S. and the government there. But there's the ICANN is based. It was founded in Australia. And the Prime Minister of Australia has refused to congratulate them for getting the Nobel Peace Prize. And that's all over the media in Australia. So they're getting, these countries are getting a lot of pressure. And we've been involved, as Anthony said, in trying to convince some of these countries to sign up. So far, 53 countries have signed. But we're pretty confident that a lot more will. As I said, 122 actually voted at the United Nations in July for this treaty, and we know that there's at least 26 other countries who voted in favor of having the negotiations at some point or other, not taking part, but were part of the process. So that's nearly 150 countries out of 195 who've been supporting this process all along, and we're going to push them until they all sign it. And we're going to tell you at the end of tonight a little bit more about our campaign to get the US involved, because we know that right now it's probably not very likely that they'll sign the treaty. However, just as the president has just announced, he was going to pull out of the Paris Agreement, and then all of a sudden all these cities and states around the country said, well, we're going to comply with the Paris Agreement anyway. We want to start a campaign here to say, well, whether the US signs it or not, we're going to comply. We're going to get cities and states and churches and schools and universities and businesses to comply with the treaty, because this is an international law. It's about something that, as many people here feel strongly about as in, other countries, and we've got to help them to see that it's, we're on their side, and that there are people in the US who oppose this as well. So I have a really weird thing on the screen. Sorry about that. That's not very relevant. Let's see. So, what I thought, as an example, I mean, it's 8:45. I have a little sort of presentation about North Korea, because a lot of people ask about that. That is a key issue for people. That, we have to have nuclear weapons because they're having them. They're about to attack the U.S. So what are we supposed to do about it? So, yes, I will. So if you'd like, I'll do that, and then we can go on to some other questions and issues, and we'll come back to this issue about where do we go from here, and how do we actually use the treaty to make a real difference in the U.S. now that we have something we can really work with. So, anybody here worried about being attacked with a nuclear weapon from North Korea? Because that's what we're told. Okay, we're told to fear this guy, right? Kim Jong-un of North Korea, who is building nuclear weapons. There's no doubts about that. He is building nuclear weapons, and there's also no doubt that he's building weapons in order to be able to reach the United States. So, as you know, because it's all over the press, there's been a series of nuclear testing in North Korea, and the most recent one just last month was the largest by far of the tests that they've done. And we hear a lot about the range of the missiles that they're testing from North Korea. Now, you can see this outer ring would reach all the way, here to New York, and I guess Florida sticks out there and would survive. But this is if you look, you can see at the bottom there, the KN08 11.5 kilometers range under development. So you hear a lot of stories about these missiles about to launch nuclear weapons against the United States, but in fact, this is still in the future. They do not have, at this moment, a missile that can reach the United States. They have missiles that can reach Guam. So if you see in the first, second, third, the third ring is what they've been, proven to have capability of, and they are developing and testing other ones, but they don't have any evidence that they can reach these outer rings, and in fact they don't have any evidence at all that they can put a nuclear weapon on a missile and have it go to that range, because that's another whole level of technology. They can explode a nuclear bomb under a mountain, but putting it onto a missile and having the missile still go to where it's supposed to is another whole level of technology. So realistically, right now, North Korea does have a lot of missiles, conventional missiles, and the capability of putting nuclear weapons that would certainly hit South Korea and Japan and other U.S. bases and so on, including Guam, and that is a danger, and people are concerned about that. They're also concerned about the fact that North Korea has the largest number of people under potentially in their armed forces, as many as 6 million people who are either there's over 1 million in their army at the moment, and there's 5 million in reserve. So it's a huge armed force in North Korea, and they have a huge number of conventional weapons aimed at South Korea, as I'm sure you all know. And one of the biggest risks of anything happening in North Korea is that North Korea will immediately launch a barrage of conventional weapons against the capital of South Korea, Seoul, which has 10 million people within range of these thousands of artillery that are just over the border. And that's another picture of the distance to Seoul. And of course, anything that happens in North Korea will almost certainly affect South Korea and Japan, who are very, very near and within a range of all, thousands of conventional missiles as well as of nuclear missiles that are in North Korea. Now, I'm sure you know, because we were actually at the United Nations the day that President Trump stood up and said that if North Korea continues developing nuclear weapons and missile technology, we will totally destroy them. This was an unprecedented for a US president or anybody in the United Nations to stand up and say that they're going to destroy a country of 25 million people. But the scary thing is that it's not only Trump saying this, and it's not only Trump who is absolutely determined to stop North Korea from developing nuclear weapons. I've been involved in a lot of work in the UK and also in other parts of Europe, and they've been talking like this for several years. All the diplomats in the sort of Western alliance, NATO and these other alliances, Japan and Australia and so on, we cannot allow North Korea to develop nuclear weapons. Now, if you think about it for a minute, it goes against the whole concept of deterrence to say that we've got to somehow stop this country from building nuclear weapons, because that's supposed to be why we have nuclear weapons, right? To deter another country from having them, from using them. So it's kind of strange language, but there is an underlying determination to prevent North Korea at any price from getting these weapons, and that is what is the scary thing. It's not that North Korea, why are they building nuclear weapons, and why do they want them to be able to reach the United States? It's quite simple. It's not because it's a madman who's going to, determined to destroy New York or something. They have them for the exact same reason we have them, and the same reason France and the United Kingdom and Russia and China all claim that they want nuclear weapons, because they think it's going to deter another country from attacking them. And North Korea has every reason, if you think about the axis of evil and the language that's been thrown around for a decade now, long before President Trump, saying that North Korea is part of an axis of evil. All the other countries that were on that axis of evil, most of them have been intact, invaded. There's been regime change. Libya is in total ruins. Syria is in ruins. Iraq is in ruins. And they are expecting the exact same thing. That's not a madman's theory to think that the United States wants regime change in North Korea. And they think by having nuclear weapons that could fire back at the United States, that's their only protection against the US attacking them. That's what they think. But the real danger, as I'm sure you know, everybody here know what a nuclear submarine, US Trident nuclear submarine has on board? How many nuclear weapons? Anybody know?
96 is what I asked.
No, that's years ago. No. There's 192 nuclear warheads on each one of these submarines. The US has 14 of them, and right now at this very moment there are 2 off the coast of Korea. President Trump admitted that the other day by mistake, because they're not supposed to say where they are, but there's 2 nuclear submarines that could launch 192 warheads each and land in North Korea within minutes. Now, one of the slides that I forgot to put in here is where the North Korean missiles and even their conventional forces are, because there is no way that you can use conventional weapons, not even the Moab that was used in Afghanistan, or the largest conventional weapons that the US has. They could drop them all on North Korea and it would not affect their nuclear program, because these are built inside mountains. They're under hardened concrete silos. They've been preparing this stuff since the Korean War in the 1950s. They know exactly what their threat is from the United States, and they have built their stuff to withstand that. There is nothing short of a nuclear attack that would stop North Korea militarily from doing what it's doing. And that is exactly what they're planning right now, which is why we're in such a dangerous situation. That's just a picture of the inside of one of those submarines. There's 16 missiles on each submarine, and each missile has 8. Does that add up to 192? No, there's 24, I think. 24 missiles on each submarine and 8 warheads on each. Do you know, Seth, what the numbers are?
That's 192.
Yeah, 24 times 8. I think that's right. Now there's been different configurations of these warheads because of the the new START agreement, and they're supposed to be cutting back. But at the moment, there are 2 nuclear submarines off the coast of Korea with as many as 192 warheads each, so that's nearly 400 altogether. Now these warheads, anybody know the size of the warhead that completely destroyed the city of Hiroshima in 1945? 13 or around 15 kilotons. And what is the size of the warheads on the Trident submarines? Anybody know?
A lot bigger.
Well, most of them have 475 kilotons. That's 475,000 tons of TNT compared to 15,000. So that's, how many times bigger is that? 15 into 475? 30 times bigger. So each one of those warheads, of those 192 warheads, are already 30 times bigger each than the bombs that destroyed entire cities. And these are some of the targets in North Korea. As you can see, there's plenty of them around Pyongyang, and all of these are around areas of population. So no matter what they are talking about, attacking military, you are talking about huge numbers of nuclear weapons. And of course, one of the difficulties, if you like, with a nuclear missile with 8 warheads on it is that once you fire one, you've got 8 warheads that are going to go off somewhere. So they can't just fire one nuclear weapon at North Korea. They've got to fire them in groups of 8. So 8 missiles, 8 warheads rather, as a minimum, and they're likely to fire that entire submarine's worth, to be honest, but 8 of those landing in those areas are going to cause massive damage. This is some of the these are the areas that would be most affected by a nuclear attack on North Korea. We know from Hiroshima what 15 kilotons does to a city, and you can just imagine multiplying that by 30 times or whatever. We also know from the Fukushima disaster where the radiation goes. Okay, it doesn't just stay in North Korea. The radiation, 10 days from Fukushima, the radiation was already affecting western parts of the United States. We also know from the nuclear testing in the 1950s and 60s that the radiation goes up into the upper atmosphere, it circulates around, it comes down in rain anywhere, absolutely anywhere. In the UK, we had 25 years after the Chernobyl disaster, we still had farms that could not take their meat to market because the radiation levels were too high in parts of Wales and northern England. 25 years later, this radiation goes everywhere, and it's not just the radiation, but we now know from the climate change modeling, actually, we know so much more about the dangers of a large number of nuclear weapons going off at once. Now this was a study done about the possible effects of a so-called small nuclear war between India and Pakistan, which, by the way, is still very much another danger. And they estimated 100 Hiroshima-sized nuclear weapons landing in India and Pakistan would cause climate change in the northern hemisphere sufficient to starve 2 billion people just from the crop damage and the climatic effects. Now, just to remind you, 100 Hiroshima-sized bombs is only 3 of the Trident ones, right? If the Trident ones are 30 times that size, just 3 of those. So we're talking about, even if they just launch one missile from one submarine, with 8 warheads on it, we are talking about the potential damage of climate change that could affect people all over the world. And that is just from the threat that we face right now at this very moment. It could happen any day, any hour, that Trump gives the order, okay, where the time for patience is over, or whatever he said, you know. What was the other threat he made just a few days ago? You know, you can't keep track of them. I know, yeah. It's seriously scary, and it's seriously urgent that we do something about this, and that's why we have the good news about the nuclear ban treaty and what we can do to actually build momentum and build concern in this country about what's going on, and pressure from other countries. So one of the things about the ban treaty, which I really like, is that the US government really does not like this treaty. They do not like it one bit. In fact, they are putting enormous pressure on other countries not to sign it. They produced a document which I have right here. Here is a copy of the treaty, if anybody's interested. And here is a NATO document to all the members of NATO as to why NATO members should not sign this treaty, or not even take part in the negotiations, which most of them did not. And the reasons, not only will it upset the US training exercises and, you know, agreements with other countries to have nuclear weapons. I mean, there still are US nuclear weapons, as you probably know, in Europe, in a number of countries, but it will affect their ability to take to have port calls with nuclear ships, to fly over with nuclear planes, nuclear capable planes. But really, the most important thing that they're worried about is that this is going to undermine the public confidence in nuclear deterrence. And that's exactly what this is meant to do. It's about stigmatizing this whole idea that nuclear weapons are somehow normal and we can just carry on indefinitely with this threat hanging over us. And the rest of the world is saying, no, we don't accept this. And my own dream is that as they have this massive development program for building new generation of nuclear weapons and so on, that they're going to need parts that come from a certain country, like, you know, which has signed the treaty, and they're going to say, nope, you can't have it. They're going to need, those companies are going to need financing from banks that are based in Switzerland or Saudi Arabia or wherever else. So they're going to say, nope, you can't have that finance. And there are going to be companies that have branches in these other countries that have signed the treaty who are going to be under pressure to say, you're breaking international law, and you could be taken to court in another country, even if you can't be taken to court in the US. There's a current move right now, I don't know if you heard about this, but after the treaty was agreed, the next move was to say, okay, in the International Criminal Court, we have to have a new crime added to the list, because nuclear weapons are now clearly a crime against humanity, and taking part in any, you know, the language is very, very comprehensive. You can't assist another country in developing or deploying nuclear weapons. You can't have them on your territory. You have a commitment in the treaty to work to get all countries to sign the treaty. So there's lots of ways in which companies in particular that are involved, that are complicit in the nuclear weapons industry, are going to be under growing pressure from all over the world, because no country exists in just one country anymore. You know, they're all over the place, and these companies are going to be under pressure, and we're going to put them under even more pressure in this country, because our campaign is about getting these cities and states and so on to announce that they're going to comply with this treaty, even though the federal government is not going to. So that's our plan. And what was next?
Did you want to show that little quick, the funny video?
Oh yeah. So I've got another, just to lighten us up a little bit. I've got another video. Some of you may have seen or heard of. Anybody here seen Yes Minister, Yes Prime Minister? Yeah. So you may have seen this clip before, but this is from 1980, and it was first. There's two parts to it. It's very short. The first part is explaining what we mean by deterrence. And I spent a lot of time in the book trying to address this issue because people still can't get it into their heads that these weapons are useless. They do not deter anybody. It's a game. It's a mind game, and it doesn't actually add up to anything. It doesn't make sense. And this is the best explanation I could find. I tried to put this in my book, but they wouldn't let me because it's BBC. But this is about deterrence. And then the second part of it is the real reason why we have nuclear weapons, which we'll go into.
Proves instead, no, we shall buy no more nuclear weapons. But, Prime Minister, you're not a secret unilateralist. No, we still have Polaris. But Polaris is a ramshackle old system. The Soviets might easily develop a multi-layered ballistic missile defense system which could intercept Polaris. By when? Well, in strategic terms, any day now. By what year, precisely? 2020. But that's sooner than you think. And are you saying that this nuclear defense system would stop all 192 Polaris missiles? Well, not all, no, virtually all, 97%. Well, that would still leave, what, about 5 bombs that would get through? Precisely, a mere 5. Enough to obliterate Moscow, Leningrad, and Minsk. Yes, but that's about all. I should have thought it was enough to make the Russians stop and think. But it's not fair. With Trident, we could obliterate the whole of Eastern Europe. What do I obliterate the whole of Eastern Europe? But it's a deterrent. It's a bluff. I probably wouldn't use it. Yes, but they don't know that you probably wouldn't. They probably do. Yes, they probably know that you probably wouldn't, but they can't certainly know. They probably certainly know that I probably wouldn't. Yes, but even though they probably certainly know that you probably wouldn't, they don't certainly know that although you probably wouldn't, there's no probability that you certainly would.
That's what deterrence means.
What? It all boils down to one simple issue. You are the Prime Minister of Great Britain. Don't you believe that Great Britain should have the best? Yes, of course. Very well. If you walked into a nuclear missile showroom, you would buy Trident. It's lovely, it's elegant, it's beautiful. It is quite simply the best, and Britain should have the best. In the world of the nuclear missile, it is the Savile Row suit, the Rolls-Royce Corniche, the Chateau Lafitte 1945. It is the nuclear missile Harrods would sell you. What more can I say? Only that it costs £15 billion and we don't need it. Well, you can say that about anything at Harrods.
So, anyway, there you go. So that's sometimes humor can do more than a lot of words in a book. So I think we're going to open it up now for some more interactive, discussion about some of the issues. As I said, it's not so much about having a debate about what is the right answer, but it's about how to have these conversations with people that will help convince people. And after I did the book, I think I started to say that I started running workshops called having difficult conversations about nuclear weapons, because people need practice. So we set up role plays, and we practice talking to each other about some of these things, and we practice hearing the answers that we've heard, maybe in our heads or maybe in real life, when we've tried to have a conversation and people say, well, you don't know what you're talking about, And it comes down to a lot more than just having the right arguments and the right facts and figures, because people don't actually often make their decisions on the basis of logic, do they? So it's about how we get across to people. How do we empathize with their concerns? And I tried to use these techniques in the book. So every chapter starts out by explaining why people think the things that they do think about nuclear weapons, and then how do we undermine that in a way that enables people to change their opinion about it without being attacked. Because as soon as you attack them, you've lost the argument, basically. So, how do you want to do this?
Well, is there a question or is there a comment that someone would like to flesh out a little bit? Needs a little help with? Here comes one up here.
Sorry, I hit the door. So I'm thinking about our Navy having a lot of accidents, all things being related. And I was thinking about those submarines, and I was wondering what happens if something happens to one of the submarines? Like, I don't quite understand. I know that the warheads aren't armed all the time until they're on the missile and they're in the air, but that's a lot of nuclear material.
There certainly is.
Like if they were attacked or crashed, which seems more likely right now, what happens to the nuclear material that's on the submarine? The lots and lots of nuclear material that's on the submarine.
Okay, let me just show you a picture. Hold on.
Did everyone hear that?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Well, as you know, and I'll let Tim, we've had many accidents.
Yeah, right.
And we've had a disastrous consequences.
Okay, so here is what happens to a nuclear ballistic missile submarine when it has an accident. This was a Russian one, but there have been lots of accidents on submarines, as you know, not on nuclear weapons ones necessarily, but certainly there have been several. Anybody have any idea how many nuclear weapons are at the bottom of the sea right now? There's 50. There's 50 approximately. Nobody knows. I have a picture of somebody who found one. So there's one less. Wait, where is that? No, that's in a different slideshow. Hold on. But I don't think so. But we're living with these dangers all the time. Of course, there are risks. Let me just show you what happens when I don't know if you know about this. What happens if a U.S. Air Force plane mistakenly dropped 2 nuclear bombs on North Carolina? And they did that in 1961. And who's the guy?
John Oliver.
John Oliver said that's why we have 2 Carolinas, because 3 megaton bombs. Now 3 megatons is 3 million tons of TNT compared to the Hiroshima bomb of 15,000. So you're talking about massive bombs. You can see there. That one, 5 out of the 6 safety catches failed. So that only didn't go off because of 1 of 6 safety catches. The other one is still in the ground in North Carolina. It fell deep into the mud and they don't dare to touch it. So they put a sign up saying nuclear mishap, and they put a fence around it, and it's still there. There are nuclear weapons in the ice in Greenland, and the ice is melting. So what's going to happen when the ice melts and the weapons are suddenly visible again? As I said, the weapons that are at the bottom of the sea include weapons that have crashed from plane crashes. They've sunk with ships, with submarines, and they've actually rolled off the deck of some ships, just rolled off into the sea. It's unbelievable when you think about, we're talking about nuclear weapons that can destroy all life on Earth, and they just roll off a deck into the, So, this is the risk. These are the risks that we're facing. And yes, the submarines are a risk. All the time that they're there, they're a risk.
So these are good answers to a question like when people tell us they're safe, as long as they're in good hands. Accidents happen all the time.
Yeah.
And they can happen. These are machines that break, and we're humans that make mistakes. So yeah, accidents will happen.
Let me just show you one more. So this is one of the Minuteman silos in South Dakota or somewhere. And I don't know if anybody's read the book Command and Control, or I think there's a film out now.
Yeah.
So this worker dropped a wrench from the top there. It fell down the bottom, broke a pipe, caused an explosion, and that's what you get at the end of that. The missile exploded. Luckily for everybody, the nuclear warhead did not go off. But I mean, we're talking about such close calls, and I don't know if you heard, what's his name? Perry? No. Butler. No, it was the one in the film. Lee Butler said, we were saved in the Cold War by a combination of luck, divine intervention, something could have gone wrong at any time, and it still we're still facing that every day, and it's becoming more and more dangerous as these things get older and people no longer know how to fix them and things like that. So, which that book is just scary beyond belief, really.
I have a question. In some of the people who have been in the military are hopeful that if the president gave the order to attack, that the military would refuse somewhere down the line. Do you have you delved into that at all? Do you think that is at all probability? Because the military is based on obedience.
Command and control, yeah, obedience, yeah. Well, there's another film, which I don't know if anyone has seen, called The Man Who Saved the World. Has anybody seen that? Yeah. So this is about a Russian commander who did refuse orders, and was told that there's been all these not just accidents, but misunderstandings or false alarms, whatever. He was told that the Soviet Union was under attack and he was supposed to fire his nuclear weapons, and he refused the orders. So he literally saved us all. And so there are those examples, but the most scary thing that I've ever encountered was in the UK, where I was actually on a street stall, trying to sell my book and talking to people on the street. And this guy came up, and he was in the Royal Navy. He worked on nuclear submarines, and he said when he was doing his training, they asked these sailors, who do you think is going to use a nuclear weapon first? And they all said, oh, probably India or Pakistan or Israel or something. And their instructor said, no, we will, the UK, because we follow orders. Nobody else can be guaranteed to follow orders, but we follow orders. And they're drilled into that if they have to use these weapons, they'll use them. Now, who knows, it's all a bluff from the top to the bottom. I mean, the whole thing is built on sand. But who knows? Maybe they would refuse and save us. Maybe they wouldn't.
We had an author here for the book Almighty. What was his name? But Dan Zach. And he talked about, he had a lot of contact with the Pentagon, was in the Pentagon a lot, and talked to many military people about the nuclear weapons. And he said that the thinking that he was getting from them is there has to be an explosion to change our mind from where it is presently. The only thing that will do that will be an explosion, is what he told us. And I'm like, you gotta be kidding me. It's something that I'm really fighting every day, and it's what Timmon's fighting with. We don't need to learn that way. We don't have to learn that way. We're doing everything we can that we don't learn that way. But that's what he was saying the military is going to need, and that we'll all need, is to actually see another horror, which we're trying to prevent.
Can you provide some details to what provoked Trump being called a fucking
moron? No, I don't have any details about that. Maybe somebody else. The question was, what are the details behind Tillerson calling Trump, was it Tillerson?
Yeah.
Calling Trump a fucking moron.
He wanted to increase the
yeah. I mean, so under Obama, there was already a plan, as you probably know, for a $1 trillion development of every single aspect of the U.S. nuclear arsenal, everything. The missiles, the warheads, the facilities, the silos, everything. And when Trump got in, he increased it by another $200 billion. So that's, a lot of money in itself. So the Pentagon doesn't even want that money. That's part of the issue. But also, all these threats that are being made about North Korea are, I started explaining, the danger of that, what would happen if the U.S. attacked North Korea. But, all the threats and counter threats are putting the possibility of a mistake so much higher. If and I don't know how many people here are familiar with the term counterforce and, use them or lose them kind of thing. But, all the nuclear weapons in the world are pretty much aimed at each other, because that is the biggest threat. If you're going to, once you start a nuclear war, we're all doomed. And so the only enemy, if you like, are the other nuclear weapons. So all the US nuclear weapons, until North Korea came along, were aimed at the Soviets and the Russian weapons, and they were aimed at ours, and France are aimed at Russia, and Russians are aimed at France, and so on. India is aimed at Pakistan, all the rest of it. Those weapons, if they don't fire them first, they're going to lose them, because it only takes a few minutes for 20 minutes or 5 minutes, literally. In the case of North Korea, they've got 5 minutes warning that a submarine off their coast is launching a nuclear attack, to either launch their weapons or lose them from the attack. So the pressure of firing first, launch on warning, firing, that's why the flocks of geese flying over the radars, or whatever, these are huge risks, and the risk increases when you throw these threats around. And so, I'm sure that's also part of what's going on inside the White House. But I mean, the dangers are enormous, and as I said, my worry is that it's not just Trump, but it's a lot of people in the Pentagon, in the State Department, in the diplomatic community, not just in the United States, who are saying, you've got to do something about North Korea. And that's just putting this enormous pressure on a really powder keg, Yeah.
Probably an impossible question to answer, but I wonder, majority of the Joint Chiefs, do you really think they have it in their intelligence to know this stuff? I mean, not just say it out loud because of crazy Trump, but do you think at least 60 to 70% realize this? The Joint Chiefs of Staff. Could you repeat the question?
Yeah, the question is, do I really think that the Joint Chiefs of Staff majority believe what? Do they understand this, the risks that they're? I mean, firstly, we know that a lot of these people, even Kissinger and Colin Powell, all these people, when they leave, they say we got to we got to do something about this crazy business. When they're in office or in the Pentagon, they're part of it, and this is the problem. There's a logic in there that is internal to. Once you start talking about nuclear weapons and deterrence, using the language that we've been brought up with for 70 years now, you get into these mind games, and you believe. I mean, I know I have friends who believe this stuff, because that's if you don't step outside it and say, like, this is crazy talk. If you're inside it and you're deciding, well, if they launch this and we launch that, then we might get one ahead, and they're lost in that kind of thinking until they step out of it. And when they retire, they all go mea culpa, and they say, well, we got to do something about it. How many of them inside really understand the risk and I don't know the answer to that. I don't know. It's impossible. Yeah. Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Thank you. I do know a year ago, I went to lobby in D.C. I went to 65 of our representatives' offices, everyone on Appropriations Committee for this, and everyone on our Armed Service Committee. I didn't get to speak to their office people, and these are the questions I asked. And what I found, out of the 65 people that are in our government that are basically should be in charge and should know about this stuff, no one that I spoke with really thought the way Timmon's been explaining here, what one does. No one really, they had to step back. I pressed them on it. They didn't really think about what one of these nuclear weapons actually can do to New York City, D.C. So that's one thing. None of them really had a grasp at all of what the cost was. And these are people on our Appropriations Committee and our Armed Service. They really didn't know that it was costing us $1 trillion. So we don't think about it. It's off. It's not part of our democracy. It's not part of our discussion, and even our representatives. That's why we're going to move into, I think, soon, what can we do about it, and we can talk more about what we have to do. But that was shocking to me, that people we assume will know. So, yeah, thank you. Yeah, but there's also some hope, because we got a lot of good people doing a lot of wonderful things, so don't be terrified. We're in this. But, yeah, we'll move, I think, soon to where we want to go from here. But any other questions to ask Timmon about? Yeah.
Yeah, but
Jane.
you know, Anthony, when you say that, oh, don't be too terrified, there are some good people. I guess when I think of this whole question, and maybe I'm just naive, I don't think about it as good versus bad.
Right.
And the bad guys are going to go get those nuclear weapons. That guy's going to push the button, and that other guy's going to laugh. I think of it as somebody that is really cray-cray, as the kids say, wacky, who may just want to have that like, look at this guy in Vegas. They know they're all, there's great consternation because nobody can understand why this guy took these guns and killed all these people in Vegas. They're still trying to find a motive. And I guess I think of this nuclear question as one where somebody that really doesn't have a commitment to any, to life would just, does that sound naive? Because somebody might say, oh no, there's too many security steps that you have to take before you get to that point. I'm wondering what that's about.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure you've all seen Dr. Strangelove. Have everybody seen that? And this guy, Eric Schlosser, who wrote this book, Command and Control, he came to London and gave a talk saying everything in Dr. Strangelove is true. In other words, the possibility of one single person, going rogue and launching a nuclear war is we have that possibility right now. The president, in theory, has to authorize use of nuclear weapons, and as you probably know, there's a bill in Congress to sort of take that control away from the president, but I don't think it will get very far. But even though that's the case, a submarine commander is the one who presses the button, in practice, or a pilot on an airplane, and we live with this crazy possibility that any time this could happen, and people go mad just being in a submarine for months at a time, underwater with no internet, whatever. They go mad, and if you think that where our lives depend on these people that are underwater for months at a time, that's scary enough in itself. And I'm sure you probably heard of these cases where the soldiers guarding the Minuteman silos were all charged with drug offenses, or were found asleep on the job, or failed their tests or whatever. There's just so much of this that we have to do something about it, and that's why we are. So shall we move on to that part of it?
Yeah, right? Why are we supporting this treaty? What we can do about it? People want to move into that direction?
Yeah.
So, the great thing about this treaty is that it outlaws nuclear weapons. You don't have to have any more discussion about how great the world is with nuclear weapons, or why we have to have them, or whether they've kept the peace for 70 years. All the stuff in my book is completely is not relevant. These weapons are illegal. They're unacceptable. The world has said we do not accept them. They're in the same category as chemical weapons, biological weapons, landmines, other weapons that are unacceptable. And we've got to work now to explain that to people. Never mind getting into discussions about how safe they are, or whether they could go rogue. Or, the question is, how do we get rid of them? That's the only question. And even the U.S. government for the last 70 years has been promising to get rid of them. They don't do it, but that's what they say. They've always been saying that, and we've got to hold them to it. And this treaty gives us a tool to go to, as I said, companies especially, companies and banks, individual pension funds, churches, anybody and say, you've got to search for in what ways you are complicit in this industry, because this industry is going to be gone soon. We're helping you to comply with an international treaty and move away from the contracts that are funding university research, away from the investments that people may have in companies like General Dynamics or whatever, away from the work. So companies that are doing nuclear work as well as non-nuclear work, they've got to come up with plans of how they're going to move away from the nuclear work and move into other kinds of work, because this work is going. And if we start from that mentality and say, whatever you think about nuclear weapons, these weapons are going. They're out of here. It's just a matter of time, and we've got to work towards that eventuality. And if you go out of the United States and around the world, even in places like the UK, the UK is going to be the first country to actually get rid of its own nuclear weapons, because Jeremy Corbyn, who happens to be a personal friend of mine, is going to be the next Prime Minister. He spent his entire life campaigning against nuclear weapons, and I guarantee you he's going to get rid of Britain's nuclear weapons. And Scotland, as you probably also know, as a country, it's part of the United Kingdom, but as a country, 59 out of their 60 MPs to Parliament have voted against nuclear weapons. The Scottish executive, which is their own devolved government, has voted to get rid of nuclear weapons. The Scottish Parliament has voted overwhelmingly to get rid of nuclear weapons. They've had court cases before this treaty, which were thrown out because they couldn't prove that nuclear weapons were illegal. But Scotland, this is a very interesting little point, when Scotland was given limited powers of devolution under Tony Blair, one of the clauses says that Scotland Scotland has an obligation to follow international law. There's a phrase in there about Scotland's obligation, and it overrides their restrictions under the UK law, which means that if they can demonstrate that nuclear weapons are illegal internationally, they can ban them in Scotland, even though we can't ban them in England. And so there's a lot of things going on right now, and they're going to be our test case, I hope, with the treaty compliance, to say, even if the UK government will not sign the treaty right now, Scotland as a country is going to say, we're going to comply with this treaty, and we're going to do everything we can to get rid of these nuclear weapons. And of course they can't control a UK submarine base in Scotland, but they can control the roads that go to that base. They can control the laws that stop protesters from blocking the roads. They control the planning permission that allows the base to build on that area. They control a lot of things, and they're going to make it very, very hard for the UK to carry on with its nuclear weapons even before Jeremy Corbyn gets elected.
And because, can you tell, for those that don't know, where the UK's nuclear
weapons? So all the UK's nuclear weapons are in Scotland. So that's... And the other really interesting thing is there's nowhere else to put them. They've looked into every other part of the UK, and there's no place to put these submarines, because they need certain requirements, not just deep water ports and so on, but they need to store the nuclear warheads a certain distance apart from each other so that they don't go off and they're not liable to be attacked all at once and all this kind of thing. They have to be a certain distance from population centers. They've done all this research, and there is nowhere else they can put them except in Scotland. So that's...
How many MPs are against? Also, there are 58 out of 59 MPs?
Yeah, 59 out of 60 of the Scottish MPs are against the Trident. So, and as I said, these other countries, they're under enormous pressures. Japan, Canada, Australia, the Netherlands, who voted against the treaty, they're going to come under this enormous pressure from their own, and Germany. So in Germany, they did an opinion poll about the treaty while it was being negotiated. 93% of the German population wants to get rid of all nuclear weapons. 93%. And we had an MP from Germany at the UN. I don't know if you were there for that bit. He said, I guarantee you Germany will sign this treaty. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but they will sign it, because the pressure is too great in Germany. It's a major ally of the US. There's US nuclear weapons on their territory, but they're going to sign the treaty, and that's going to have a huge effect, not just in Germany, but on the US and on the whole structure that maintains the nuclear system with NATO and everything. So we're talking about pressures coming from a lot of different places to undermine this business as usual, and that's the good news.
Just to follow up with your point, all the generals, when they're speaking about, they say how important our nuclear weapons are for our fellow countries, that they need our umbrella, they need our protection, they want us to protect them. So to hear Timmon talk about these countries separating from us, that's going to be very powerful. So yeah, you hear that all the time from our generals. So, yes, sorry.
There's a lot of Catholic colleges that are involved in the industry of these weapons of mass destruction. They do it. They do science.
Yeah.
And where we are as Catholics,
Yeah.
that if parishes and bishops started to say, no, we have the Catholic Church, teach the Catholic Church about nonviolence and about nuclear war and all that.
Yeah.
They got off their butts a bit something.
Exactly.
I mean, that
Well,
could start a fire, you know? Yes.
I hope we can do that. I mean, the Vatican, I believe, was the first UN member state. I mean, they're not a state, but they're UN member, and they were the first to ratify the treaty. So the Pope has made loads of statements about nuclear weapons and about this treaty, and he was very much supporting it. The Vatican wants to ratify it, and we've got to work on the Catholic hierarchy, the bishops in this country, and on, like you say, the universities and all the rest of it, to say, look, this is international law, this is Catholic teaching, this is wrong, we got to do something about it. So I hope you can help us on that.
Notice how quickly it's gone off the map. The treaty happened a couple of weeks ago. The Nobel Peace Prize happened 2 weeks ago. And it's out off our media, we're on to the next thing. So it really is up to all of us to keep talking about it. As you said, making those personal contacts, calling NPR every once in a while. But keep talking, talk to our priests about it, to talk about this subject. Calling our reps. They don't want to talk about it. None of us, no one really wants to talk about nuclear weapons. So we keep bringing it in. Keep bringing it to your rep. What about nuclear weapons? What about that treaty? Why aren't you signing it? I call Schumer and Gillibrand almost every week, and I'm a bother to them. But I'm still pushing for meetings. So we can do this. All of us can do this. In every conversation, in all our movements that are really critical to us, like climate. Last week, Schumer was in the East Village here during the EPA cuts. I noticed he was going to come to the East Village and talk about the EPA cuts in one of our gardens, local gardens. So I went there and spoke, but more importantly than speaking to him, I wanted to speak to some of the leaders in the environmental movements that showed up there and say, can we include the nuclear movement in with climate there? We're really together in this. So any chance we can get to include this movement. In the 80s, we had our city councils passing resolutions to make nuclear free zones. I don't know if people remember? A lot of you do, I'm sure. We all kinds of resolutions against nuclear weapons. Let's get active again. I started talking to our council, local council, city council, about making another resolution. Let's start it again. It's time to start the conversation. And all our movements need to be one. We can't be in silos. All of us are running around there's so many issues now with immigration and Yemen, critical. But this is all one. We're all tied in together. Yemen and the military-industrial complex directly involved. This is what this is about. It's the same complex. It's all about armaments and military and people making some money. So let's keep including it in our conversations. Let's bring up this treaty. The treaty is online to be shared with everybody. It's free. It's up there. Pass it around like our two nuns, Sister Ardith and Sister Carol, who we know here, are going around the military bases handing this treaty into the hands of the commanders. They've been doing it all through the Midwest. Yeah. So, yeah. Talk to them. Yeah. So we're heading there. It's coming back.
Yeah.
Timmon, would you like to wrap up in any kind of way? And thank you very much for coming.
Yeah, thanks.
An honor. It's a great book.
Yeah, so if anybody wants the book,
if you know someone who wants it too. And how much are you selling it for?
$15.
Okay, 15
And there's an order form if you want to take it away. And there's free stuff in the back there, and there's free stuff on the website. And if you want to help join our campaign and start now working on treaty compliance and getting your church or your university or whatever to look into that, we're just building this campaign now. We haven't even really launched it yet, but there's a leaflet out there at the back, and there's a card with our email address, and you can be in touch, and we're going to, hopefully Anthony will be the local contact here. Okay. And we've got people in the Midwest, we've got people in California, we've got people in Massachusetts. So we're already starting to build some momentum.
What's the name of your website?
Well, the website for the book is called Disarming Arguments, and it's on the card back there. We're starting a new website, but I won't give it to you because we haven't got anything on there yet.
But if you go to Disarming Arguments,
we'll find, yeah.
Link
We'll tell you where it is, yeah.
pretty soon, actually.
Yeah.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, well, thanks everybody for coming out. Yeah, thanks.